Social isolation doesn't just make you feel bad, it actually rewires your nervous system for more stress. When you don't have close relationships, your brain interprets the world as more dangerous, as a baseline. It stays in a low-level fight or flight mode, keeping you tense, exhausted, and burned out. And it doesn't matter if you're objectively successful. If you don't have deep connections, your brain registers this as a survival threat. This is why so many high performers reach a point where everything might look great on the outside, but on the inside, unless they prioritize connection, they end up running on fumes.
Welcome to Beyond Success, the podcast for high achievers seeking deeper meaning, fulfillment, and purpose. Now, here's your host, world-renowned leadership coach and therapist, David Tian, PhD.
Most achievers have a formula. Work hard, stack wins, build success. And somewhere along the way, relationships will just work themselves out. At least that's their assumption. But that assumption is wrong. The longest-running study on human happiness, the Harvard study of adult development, proves that strong relationships are the number one predictor of not just happiness, but also health and longevity. Not money, not status, not how many luxury vacations you take or how optimized your morning routine is. Connection. Real, deep, meaningful, authentic relationships. The people who had the strongest relationships in their 50s lived longer, they were healthier, they even had better brain function in old age. Meanwhile, the most successful people who neglected connection ended up lonely, sick, and miserable, even with millions in the bank. And if you're listening to this right now, you probably already know this on some level. You've had moments, maybe late at night, maybe after a big win, where it hits you, that nagging emptiness, that voice in the back of your head asking, what's the point of all this if I have no one that I really care about to share it with? Or maybe it's more subtle. Maybe you've just gotten used to relationships feeling shallow. Surface-level conversations, business connections, acquaintances that you grab drinks with but never really open up to. Maybe you tell yourself you don't need other people that much, that you're built differently, that relationships take too much energy, and besides, you have important work to do. But the truth is, isolation isn't strength, it's a slow-acting poison. A life without real connection is a life of quiet suffering. The research backs it up. Social isolation is as bad for your health as smoking at least 15 cigarettes a day. Your nervous system is wired to need connection, and when you don't get it, it wears you down. Emotionally, mentally, and even physically. More stress, more anxiety, more burnout. Less motivation, less meaning, less life. But let's talk about what happens when you do get connection right. When you surround yourself with the right people, people who actually see you, who bring out the best in you. Then life gets so much easier. The stress that used to crush you suddenly feels lighter. The goals that used to feel like a grind suddenly start to feel exciting again. And love, fulfillment, a real sense of purpose. They're no longer things that you have to chase. They're things that you live. That's what we're diving into in this episode. Why connection is the key to everything you want. Why so many achievers screw it up. And how to start getting it right. I'm David Tian. For almost the past 2 decades, I've been helping hundreds of thousands of people from over 87 countries find success, meaning, and fulfillment in their personal and professional lives. And in this episode, I've got 4 points here on the science and psychology behind emotional connection, and let's get into the first point. And this first point draws from the longest-running study in human history, the Harvard study of adult development on human happiness. They've tracked people for more than 85 years now, following them from their teenage years all the way into old age and into several generations now. Some of them started out rich, some poor, some became wildly successful, while others struggled. But across all of them, no matter their background, no matter their career path, the number one factor that determined their happiness, their health, and even the length of their lifespan was the quality of their relationships. So it wasn't money, it wasn't their physical fitness or athleticism, it wasn't their intelligence. What mattered most was connection. And these are real, deep relationships, not like how many LinkedIn connections you had or how many Facebook friends you had, not how many followers you racked up, but the quality of the people that they surrounded themselves with and the quality of their connection. And the ones who had strong supportive relationships lived longer, they had lower rates of heart disease, their cognitive function stayed sharper as they aged, and they even reported lower levels of physical pain overall. Meanwhile, the ones who were the most isolated, the ones who prioritized success but neglected relationships, ended up paying for it mentally, emotionally, and especially physically. They had higher rates of depression, they suffered more from chronic illnesses, they even experienced a faster decline in brain function. And it actually gets worse. Social isolation doesn't just make you feel bad, it actually rewires your nervous system for more stress. When you don't have close relationships, your brain interprets the world as more dangerous, as a baseline. It stays in a low-level fight or flight mode, keeping you tense, exhausted, and burned out. And it doesn't matter if you're objectively successful. If you don't have deep connections, your brain registers this as a survival threat. This is why so many high performers reach a point where everything might look great on the outside, but on the inside, unless they prioritize connection, they end up running on fumes. They lose motivation, and they start self-sabotaging. They look for distractions, whether it's through overworking, or maybe numbing out with entertainment, or chasing short-term pleasures. And they tell themselves they just need to push harder, that they need more discipline. But what they actually need is connection. Because when you have deep, authentic relationships, when you have people that you can actually trust, who've got your back no matter what, then you don't have to live life on hard mode anymore. You'll recover from stress faster. You'll make better decisions. You stop feeling like you have to carry everything on your own. This is why success alone doesn't fulfill you. If it did, the most successful people would be the happiest people. But you know that they aren't. Look at the guys who spent their entire lives chasing money, grinding, building their businesses, while neglecting everything else, especially deep connections. Some of them end up miserable. Some fall into addiction. Some, despite having everything they once thought they wanted, end up wondering why it still doesn't feel like enough. But the people who do get connection right, they don't just enjoy life more. They thrive. Their work improves. Their health improves. Their mental clarity improves. Because they aren't just surviving. They're supported in their thriving. Okay, let's move on to the second big point here, how your social network shapes everything about you. This isn't just about who you spend time with. It's about how the people around you, including your friends, your colleagues, even your acquaintances, they actually rewire your behaviors, your mindset, your health, and your success. Nicholas Christakis, a world-renowned researcher now at Yale and previously at Harvard, ran massive studies on social networks, tracking thousands of people over decades. And the results were surprising and groundbreaking. He found that if your close friend becomes obese, your chances of becoming obese increase by 57%. Even crazier, if your friend's friend becomes obese, your risk still goes up by 20%, even if you've never met that other person, the second person. The same pattern shows up with happiness, with smoking, with drinking, even divorce rates. So if your friend gets divorced, you're 75% more likely now to get divorced yourself. And if your friend's friend gets divorced, even if you don't know this person, it's still a 33% increase for you. In fact, the effect is found even when it's your friend's friend's friend. So now 3 degrees removed from you. If they are obese, for instance, or smoking or drinking, or a new widow, your chances of experiencing the same thing also go up, even if you don't know that person or the person who is that person's friend or that person's friend. Let that sink in. Your friend's friend's friend, a person you don't even have to know, can change the trajectory of your relationships, your health, your habits, your career. So this isn't about willpower. This isn't about discipline. This is about the fact that humans are wired to sync up with the people around us. Your brain, your emotions, even your body take subtle cues from your social environment. And this can either lift you up or drag you down. I had a client, let's call him Brian. He built a company that was, by the time we started working together, doing 8 figures. He had, on the outside, the luxury life, the penthouse, the car, the lifestyle. But every time we talked about relationships, he just shrugged it off. He told me, I don't really have deep friendships. I don't need that kind of thing. And at first, that made sense to him. He was too busy. He had goals to hit. The people in his circle were other high achievers, guys who also didn't have time for anything beyond networking and business deals and business contacts. But over time, he found that his motivation for his career started slipping a lot. He'd hit a goal, feel that high for a day or two, and then he'd just come crashing down again into a feeling of emptiness, feeling like he was forcing himself through life instead of actually enjoying any of it. The problem wasn't his business. The problem was his environment. His closest relationships were people who only talked about money and deals. Nobody challenged him to grow emotionally. Nobody gave a damn about his deeper struggles or about him as a person. And the longer he stayed in that world, the more he became like them, detached, restless, never feeling fully satisfied. When he finally started surrounding himself with people who actually prioritized connection, who pushed him to be real, to open up, to stop treating life like a never-ending scoreboard, then his experience of life changed. His stress dropped, his focus came back, and he didn't need to grind his way through life anymore because he had the right people, he felt, in his corner. And this isn't just Brian. This is true of everyone. We are the average of the people we spend the most time with, not just in wealth, but in happiness, in habits, in longevity. So if your closest relationships aren't making your life better, they're making it worse.
Many high achievers struggle when it comes to managing their emotions or navigating their relationships, and they hit a wall when it comes to emotional mastery. Maybe you've noticed that stress, frustration, or anger is seeping into your personal or professional life, or you feel disconnected from those you care about. That's where David Tien's Emotional Mastery Program comes in. It's based on peer-reviewed, evidence-backed therapeutic methods to help you find happiness, love, and real fulfillment. Learn how to break free from the emotional roller coaster and start thriving in every area of your life. You can find out more at davidtianphd.com/emotional mastery. That's DAVIDTIANPHD.com/emotional mastery.
The third point builds on Maslow's hierarchy. Now, most people know Maslow's hierarchy, the pyramid that lays out human needs. At the bottom, you've got survival, food, water, shelter, and then there's safety, and then there's relationships, followed by esteem, and finally at the top, what he called self-actualization, something like becoming your best self. And for decades, this model shaped how we think about success. The idea was that you handle your basic needs first, and then once you've built security and relationships, then you get to work on personal growth. And at first glance, maybe that makes sense to you. Except Abraham Maslow himself later realized that he got it wrong. Later in his life, he updated his model. He saw that deep connection isn't just another step in the process. It's what enables everything above it. Without it, self-actualization isn't sustainable. So this flips a lot of assumptions upside down. Many high achievers believe that if they just focus on mastering themselves, on their mindset, their discipline, their productivity, then relationships will fall into place later. But Maslow's later research shows the opposite. Without real, meaningful connection, your mind and body struggle to function at their highest levels. If you don't believe that, look at what happens to people who don't have connection. Loneliness doesn't just feel bad. It affects your brain. It messes with your ability to think clearly, to stay motivated, to handle stress. It even impacts your physical health. There's research showing that people with strong relationships heal faster from injuries, recover more easily from illnesses, and live longer. Because connection isn't a luxury, it's a fuel. And let's go even deeper. Connection here isn't just about relationships with other people. It's about how you relate to yourself, your connection to yourself. This is something that comes up all the time in my therapeutic work and in my coaching work. Someone feels stuck. They've done all the right things. They've built their career. They worked on their mindset. They've hit their goals. but they're still restless, still unsatisfied. When we dig into it, there's always a disconnect. Parts of them are carrying pain that's never been processed. Parts of them have been ignored, buried, or pushed aside. And the way they relate to others is just a reflection of how they relate to those parts of them inside themselves, that internal struggle. You can't outgrow your need for connection, and you can't self-actualize in isolation. It doesn't matter how much discipline you put to it or how much you achieve. If you don't have relationships that support you, that challenge you, and keep you accountable, your growth will hit a ceiling. This is why so many high performers reach a point where they start losing momentum and burn out. They push harder, but the energy isn't there anymore. They start feeling like success has turned into a grind instead of something they want to do, that they wake up excited to do. It's because they're missing the fuel source that keeps personal growth alive. So the solution isn't to keep pushing through it. It's to stop trying to do everything alone and to start prioritizing connection. And now on to the fourth and final point. Most people assume their biggest fears are failure or rejection or loss. But when you strip away all of that, beneath the fear of not achieving enough or not being good enough or not being loved enough, there's something deeper. Abandonment, exile, being left behind. And even deeper than those is the result of abandonment, isolation. Irvin Yalom, one of the leading voices in existential psychology and one of the most renowned psychiatrists ever, spent decades studying what truly haunts people. He identified 4 fundamental anxieties that drive human behavior: death, meaninglessness, freedom, and isolation. And out of those 4, isolation is the one most people never fully confront, because it's always been there, lurking in the background, even when you're surrounded by people. Even when you're successful, even when you have everything you once thought would make you happy. It's that feeling that no one really knows you, that if you stopped performing, stopped playing the role people expect from you, then they'd lose interest. That if something went wrong, really wrong, you would have no one you cared about to turn to. And it's not just a feeling. Isolation is woven into the human experience. Like, no one else can live your life for you. No one else can fully understand what it's like to be you. No matter how much love and connection you have, there's a part of the journey that only you can walk. For high achievers, this tends to show up in a different way. They don't call it isolation. They call it something like independence or self-reliance, or they call it not needing anyone. But underneath all of that is the same fear: being abandoned, being disconnected, exiled, being left to deal with life completely alone. And for a lot of successful people, that fear started way before they ever became successful. Maybe it started in childhood. Maybe they had parents who only gave them attention when they won something or achieved something or proved something. I know what that's like. Maybe they grew up in an environment where weaknesses weren't tolerated. Maybe they got burned in relationships. They trusted someone, depended on someone, and then got left, betrayed, or rejected. Or maybe it was all of that. So they adapted. They built a life where they didn't have to rely on anyone. And it worked for a while. It made them strong. It made them capable. It made them successful. But it also came with a horrible cost. Because that deep-seated fear of abandonment doesn't just disappear when you become an adult. It doesn't go away when you make money or reach a certain level of success. Instead, it just hides. It stays in the background, shaping decisions, shaping relationships, shaping how much trust you allow yourself to feel. And it especially shows up in relationships. For some, it looks like never letting people get too close. Maybe they date, maybe they have friendships, but there's always a wall, a sense that at the end of the day, they're still alone. That if things go wrong, they're the only one they can really rely on. For others, it's the opposite. They do get attached, but they get too attached. They go all in on relationships too quickly, or they latch onto people who aren't even right for them. or they feel abandoned over small things, or they take normal distance as rejection, or overanalyze every little sign that someone might leave. Same fear, different strategies. The mistake high achievers make is assuming they can solve this fear on their own. Read the right books, do enough self-reflection, stay independent, don't rely too much on others. But this is the one thing you cannot solve alone. Dr. Irvin Yalom pointed this out in his work. Connection is the antidote to isolation. Not just the idea of it, but the experience of it. Actually allowing yourself to be seen, to be known, to be vulnerable. And that is the real challenge, because that means facing whatever parts of you have been afraid to connect in the first place. Because for them, the idea of being fully seen, flaws, fears, weaknesses, and all, feels just as terrifying as being alone. But this is why people stay stuck. It's why they tell themselves connection isn't that important. Because opening up feels like a risk, and being alone, at least in a controlled way, feels somehow safer. But safety isn't the same as fulfillment. And all the research shows that deep connection doesn't come from needing people less. It comes from accepting that no matter how strong, successful, or independent you are, you'll never escape your human need for connection. And trying to deny that only makes the loneliness worse. And there's only one way through it. You have to let yourself be seen. You have to stop running away. And that starts by being honest, first with yourself, then with the people who are actually worth opening up to. Okay, let's bring this all together. We started with the research, the hard evidence that connection isn't just something nice to have. It's not extra, it's not optional. It's the foundation of a meaningful, thriving life. The Harvard study of adult development, the longest-running study in history, proved that strong relationships predict happiness, health, and even the length of your life. Social isolation wrecks you, mentally, emotionally, physically, medically. Then we broke down the ripple effect of connection. Nicholas Christakis' research showed how relationships shape everything. The people around you don't just influence your emotions. They mold your habits, your health, your decisions, your long-term success. You absorb the energy, the mindsets, the behaviors of the people closest to you, and even the people closest to them, whether you realize it or not. Next, we updated Maslow's hierarchy. He originally put self-actualization at the top as if it were the final step after you've handled relationships, but later in life he admitted that he had it backwards. Deep connection fuels personal growth. Without it, self-actualization doesn't stick. And then there's the existential reality. Yalom's work laid it out clearly. No matter how independent or successful we are, we all struggle with the fear of isolation, and the people who try the hardest to outrun it suffer the most. To illustrate this, let me tell you about a client of mine. He checked all the boxes of success. We'll call him Kevin. So Kevin spent years building his company, his wealth, his reputation. He had a mansion, the fancy cars. He had the financial freedom. He'd even been married before, but it ended in divorce. At the time, he told himself relationships weren't a priority. He had bigger goals. He had high standards. He had better things to do than chase something as unpredictable as connection or love. But after his biggest financial year ever, he hit a wall. He started feeling restless. Work felt like a treadmill. No matter what he accomplished, the high didn't last. He got into casual relationships, but they all felt the same way. Exciting at first, then empty. He had plenty of people around him, but none of them really knew him. And he wasn't sure that they actually were with him because of him rather than what they can get out of him. He told himself he just needed another goal, another challenge, something even bigger. But that wasn't the answer for him. What Kevin was running from was connection. He was terrified of being seen, not as the successful entrepreneur, not as the high-status guy who had his life together, but as a human being, as someone with fears, with wounds, with the same need for love and belonging as anyone else. And the irony was that this was the real challenge for him, the one that he had been avoiding his whole life. Because relationships aren't a distraction from success. They're the foundation of lasting success. when Kevin finally prioritized connection, not just dating or hookups, but deep friendships, real emotional intimacy. His entire life started to shift. He didn't lose his edge. He didn't slow down in his career. But for the first time in years, he wasn't just achieving, he was living. And that's the real takeaway here. Success alone doesn't fulfill us. Relationships do. But most achievers still deprioritize connection. They disrespect it. They tell themselves they'll focus on it later, that it's not urgent, that it'll just work itself out. But it won't, not automatically. And in the next episode, we're going to break down exactly why high achievers struggle with deep connection, the defense mechanisms that keep them stuck, and how to start making the shift before it's too late. Thank you so much for listening. If this has resonated with you in any way, please share it with anyone else that you think could benefit from it. If you liked it, hit a like or give it a 5-star rating on whatever platform you're listening to this on. And if you have any feedback whatsoever, I'd love to get it. Leave me a comment or send me an email. I'd love to get your feedback. I look forward to welcoming you to the next episode. Until then, Dave Etienne, signing out.